Okay, so welcome everyone. This is 15th of February 2023. This is our APAC EMEA orchestration demo. And Graham, you have the first discussion item.
Yeah, so really just what I wanted to run through is basically 3 issues on the release environments epic, just to kind of give a quick update on where they're at, just make sure that I guess if we're all on the same page and just let everyone know where the blockers are and what have you. Overall, things are progressing well from my side, and so I'm hitting the pointy end now where we're starting to have to deal with and interface with other groups and stuff, which is where things, I wouldn't say getting held up, but it's starting to become a little bit tricky to navigate, obviously. So the first one is a link there is just this is the epic on the GitLab project itself to actually get images start being built on stable branches. I've tried to get people to review it based off ReviewBot, and it seems to have been a little bit stalled. I might give it another day, but I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm not entirely sure how to proceed with this. I'm not sure if just us as in delivery, like someone else in delivery just reviewing it and approving it is enough. It seems like almost like I don't know who actually, if anyone really owns the CI configuration as a whole for that project. Maybe it's just the case of, hey, we're just adding our own thing. We can just approve it and get it merged. But that's kind of where that's at.
If this starts failing, who would fix it?
I mean, it would be our responsibility in broken master. If it was a broken master situation, I'd definitely just be like, let's just revert it and roll it back. The jobs are marked as allowed to fail. So all this is doing is essentially at the end of the process and only on stable branches, we're just going to be starting to build these images, triggering a pipeline into CNG that we're hopefully going to get images out of that we will start deploying. But yeah, for this iteration, everything's set to allow failure, so that, if it does fail, it shouldn't be an issue. But always the plan is if this for some reason causes a lot of issues, I would just, revert the change and roll it back. But it hopefully.
So I was thinking kind of like longer term, like would we remain being the owners for this, or is this distribution?
It's a good question. So I think we've kind of discussed this in the past, right? And because there's 3 parts to this whole process end to end, and in fact, this kind of child pipeline that we're building within the GitLab repo for stable for stable branches, split into 3 parts, right? There's the building images, there's the deploying, and then there's the QA. The building images, we would really like, I guess, distribution to own, but when we talked about this on the issue, they've seen, I'm not quite sure the level of buy-in they have from that. The project we're actually building in is this CNG mirror, which they're using specifically for images built with review apps as well. So it's kind of like a general purpose, more high traffic CNG mirror rather than one of the official repos. So it's a good question. I mean, ultimately it'd be good. Hey, it's a distribution pipeline. They should debug it and fix it. But to be honest, no, it's not until you've just brought it up then that I realized that we may not have the buy-in from them to do that. If there is, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't have to trigger a build. I can use any images that I want. And actually talking about this, it's also the third point on my to-do with about the QA stuff. I'm happy to do whatever the group in question wants, distribution, quality, or whatever. I just need them to give me a solution or an idea or something, because at the moment everyone's a bit, oh, you could probably try doing this, but they're always kind of like keeping it at arm's length.
Sorry, I interrupt.
No, that's
okay. I was looking at the suggested reviewers on that merge request. I'm a bit surprised because I thought that pipeline changes, like changing the base rules or changing the structure of pipeline, falls under engineering productivity.
Okay.
And none of the reviewer or the maintainer selected are part of those, Tim. So maybe it's worth, if you're struggling to find someone that actually can make a stance on this and suggest it is safe to merge, or that kinds of own the pipeline, or the overall the structure of the pipeline, this should be engineering productivity.
And I think I initially reached out to Ash, who I believe is in engineering productivity, but he, I guess for whatever reason, seemed Ash McKenzie. Is he? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
I think it's in Geo.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong.
It says Stuffy back engineering productivity at GitLab.
Okay.
But maybe he's moved and isn't Geo at the moment. I'm not entirely sure.
No, you're right. It's my wrong. You're right. Yeah.
But yeah, look, I'll try.
What led me to my original question as well, Graham, where I think we might, because what I was going to say is, if we are thinking long term, this is a distribution owned thing, then I think we absolutely want to get a review from distribution, because it would be much better for any disagreements to come out right now versus in 6 months' time. What I'm not totally clear on, I see on the issue, Jason has mentioned that theoretically the approach that you've suggested is the right way, but he also says it may take a bit of expansion and confirmation, but I believe this is a strategy that could be made to work. So I kind of agree with you that we perhaps don't have great distribution buy-in. It might be worth us deciding, is that where we want to go? Are we? It sounds like from previous conversations that answer is yes, right? From our perspective, these are no different, particularly from other packages we tag. Is that still where we think this sits? It's just we're creating more of them.
I believe so. I don't see why they wouldn't, right? So at the end of the day, when we tag a release, as an example, it's the contents of the stable branch. It's just we're doing more. We're basically, it's like we tag, kind of like we are tagging every commit. And I think I wouldn't say the fear, but the nervousness was around how many more extra packages that would create, which, it is more packages, but I didn't think more packages was an unsolvable problem. But yeah, it's hard.
I think it's probably twofold though, right? Because I guess one is the workload. So potentially there's a lot more pipelines to fail, which could throw a lot more work at distribution. I think the other one that Jason mentioned was just noise, right? I guess in just there being so many packages. So remind me again, I think, Alessia, you might have mentioned this. How does the review app work with, does the review app run packages?
Yeah, it should run packages, not this one.
So actually,
knows better than me.
Yeah, so the review apps is literally what I'm doing here. So what I've taken, the repo and everything, is what they're using for review apps. That's how I think they came to the suggestion to. Okay. So the difference is, review apps is on MRs, so it's more related about MRs, and everything is truly ephemeral because after the MR's over, you kind of don't care about it. Whereas this is the opposite. It's we're not tracking this on MRs. We're actually tracking it when things are we're interested when things are merged, when they're it's less ephemeral than
Yeah.
But still, it's kind of ephemeral because it's not tagged releases. It's not like the actual RCs or anything. So it's kind of this weird spot in between the two. Not
really. That's what I was going to say. I think if we are saying this is similar, we can try and head down the same direction. Are we putting our packages in the same place as the review apps packages?
At the moment, yeah.
Okay. So there's not there's already a lot of packages in there, right? And we are just adding to those.
So okay, I think they're okay with us using that repo for this, because for the increase in packages, I think that was use this. This has already got a lot of packages. We don't mind. I think his second part was I think he was more worried about, will this actually work? Will you get what you want out of this? Yeah, because we did build this system. We built this repo and this design for review apps, and maybe there's some difference out of there.
Okay, that's fine. We can iterate on that, right? Yeah. I think that's definitely something which I think if we can, I think that's a perfectly reasonable question, and what we can just, we all have to see, right? We think so, but we'll iterate if needed. Okay, that makes sense.
So I think, I've already tested it and I've gotten packages out, which I think have the content I wanted. So everything in that MR I tested manually by using the GLab CLI and like basically doing a trigger like it was a trigger job from the thing, passing the variables in that I thought it would pass through. And what I got out of that seems reasonable to me. This seems workable. So I think from a technical level, what I have in the MR is good for a start. Now, the question will become like later on if distribution are like, yeah, okay, actually we want you to push that, we want you to use different repo because now we've decided this is
iterate on
it's
that.
literally
Exactly.
That's fine. Like that's literally just changing the repo point. I don't think that because all of these are mirrors of they're all mirrors, right? So the way they work, their CI setup, besides pointing to different actual package registries, they all operate identically. Because they all have they're the same GitLab CI and all these repos. It's just where the packages end up, which repo they end up in, and some rules about how they're built. But I think they try and keep that to a minimum just to stop that kind of.
Graham, do you mind sharing how to trigger this type of build with GitLab?
Yeah, so let me see if I've kept the. Yeah, so I'm trying to think. So this is. I'll put this somewhere on the actual issue, but I'll quickly just share my screen to think this will, is this kind of working? Can you see a text file?
Yeah.
So is this nice? There we go.
Okay.
So that's GLab CI run, branch master, all of the different variables that I picked up by looking through where they come from in the upstream repo. And then this is the repo. GitLab org build CNG mirror.
Okay.
That's what I've tried. So, and all of these come from the CI setup for the GitLab org GitLab repo.
Okay.
Which mostly like because they've got a lot of.
How do you get how do you refer the final image with this information? So how can you download the CNG image?
Good question. So I'm not sure if I can find
GitLab tag. I think that if you pass in GitLab tag, it should be how you want your image to be.
Yeah, look, sure. I haven't explored that, but there's a job at the end of the CNG pipeline that's literally called like list final images or something. And in the job, they list all the images. And I think they even store that as an artifact. And I think that's where I was looking. It was like, okay, this kind of like these look like images that make sense to me. If they don't, I think you're right. I think we can expand this to like, I don't know, like change that formatting so that we come out.
Now, because this is very interesting with the idea of not committing a version file for auto-deploy images, because basically this is what we want to do. Sending those information to the real CNG, not the mirror, and faking the tag itself, right? So we're not writing a file with all the information that is just lays there forever in the auto-deploy branch, but just saying, this is the expected auto-deploy version. So build me the packages with this content.
Exactly. Yeah, and it saves, especially for like the C and E stuff, like you have to tag and then you get a pipeline of that, then you change the word to CE and then you tag and then you change, like it seems less efficient. The good thing about those tags though, however, I will say is the Git history allows you to find the CI pipeline easy. So GitLab, the product, does not make finding CI pipelines easy. So I don't know. Maybe if distribution will be able to label the pipelines or we could make them more searchable, it should be easier, right? I guess that's the only tricky part, but I'm not entirely sure how often we go back and search for pipelines.
So that we're taking a tangent here, but basically what we are trying to do, we started doing recently, is to augment release metadata commit with trailers. So we can treat this as a database, right? So right now we have the information about, is this representing an auto-deploy package? This commit represent a new auto-deploy package or not, and the version. So in an ideal world, we can say build metadata information, then we tag as we do today, but instead of tagging by real tagging, we are triggering, and the trigger operation gives you back the CI build. It gives you the URL. So when you're going to write down metadata, you can say this is the CNG pipeline responsible of this, and this is the omnibus pipeline responsible of this. Then later on, when you go deploying something, you can say give me the last scroll. I mean, not give it, just give me the list of packages from most recent to the older one. And then from each one, you can say, is it auto deploy? Yes. Then you have the pipelines. Is the pipeline complete? Yes. Or if it's no, you just move to the next one, right? So is this still an auto deploy? Yes. Is the pipeline ready? Yes. Then I will deploy this package.
Yeah, makes sense. So circling back to this whole point then, so this is my kind of take on it, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong. What I have, I think, is a good enough kind of cross-section of distribution would be like, is comfortable with the approach. I think I've tested it okay. I think I'm putting it in the pipelines. The GitLab pipeline is minimal risk, like if the jobs fail or anything. What I really want is just to get it done so I can get something and try and test deploying it, because I feel like I'll probably understand more. And then also the like long-term support and how we engage with distribution, I think is obviously still probably a deeper conversation we need to have. But I also feel like having more to show distribution end to end about the process, like it's like, hey, we're just using your CNG mirror at the thing, but this is the all end-to-end process. We need better support. And if they're like, okay, well, maybe we should shift this to building in another mirror or something, I feel like that conversation might be easier to have when I can demonstrate more pieces of the whole picture together.
What I would recommend, Graham, is on the MR, it's not immediately obvious that what we're doing is copying that the review apps process. It might be really worth just making that super clear, making the intention like we are going down this route. We think this will give us enough for testing. Our intention is to start generating these packages. We may need to iterate more on them further, but for now, this gives us the testing. At least that gives people a little bit more context. I would suggest on the issue, respond to Jason and say more or less the same, which is you may be right. Here is the MR where we're going to go down this route. I think it's good enough for testing. And then it's just a case of getting the reviews.
Which I'll also, I'll try and chase up.
I would ask Jason if, like, I would add Jason on there, but I do wonder if there is someone who, like, I wonder if someone like Grant from Quality might be happy to review this, because I know he does lots of, I don't know if he's not that close to maybe review apps, but it feels like there must be somebody like.
Well, it's probably productivity, honestly. I think, or distribution. I feel like because distribution own review apps, I've seen they're the ones who implemented it all. So it's kind of like, if this was review apps, it'd be easy. If it's the fact that we're kind of breaking new ground, right? Like, hey, we're doing this. I think engineering productivity from just is this healthy for the pipeline? Is this going to cause a broken master situation? Would be good to review. But I kind of feel like, we kind of own it ourselves. We're building this thing as a new thing that we own, but like we're the ones, similar to like review apps, like distribution kind of own that whole thing. So I think between
we can't own this end to end. So
no, not end to end.
Distribution has it end to end as they build and ship the thing. Here we rely on distribution as an interface for building packages. So there is where the shared understanding of what we are doing is important, right? Because they need to be aware that there is an interface between what we are doing here and what they are providing.
Yeah, well said there. Let's say, it's definitely a good point. I would suggest, Graham, in that case, use the distributions review process. They have labels to request reviews. I would mention Jason on the issue and then set the MR up using the distribution review process.
Cool.
And let's wait for them, because I think if they object, we cause ourselves so many problems in the future.
No, good, fair point. And then hopefully I'll try and chase someone from developer, I'll chase someone else to just give it another thumbs up for the overall. I haven't done anything egregious to the whole setup for the pipeline and how it compared to everything else and the rules and stuff.
I think that makes total sense. Yeah.
Cool. That was helpful.
I'll just link it in there. So.
Cool. So the second issue is, obviously this isn't blocking yet, because the real blocking thing is getting the images built. But the second part would be how we actually get that pipeline now on the stable branches to deploy. And so, we have the release environments repository, and it's kind of, wouldn't say an experiment, but it is different than how we've done things in the past, because we're not relying on pipeline, like triggering a pipeline and passing variables to do deployments. We're actually relying on committing files and updating version files in the repo in like a true kind of GitOps fashion. So what we need is some piece of automation. I'm not sure where it lives. I'm not sure if it even needs to be that complicated, right? I'm interested in other people in the team, back in engineering especially, to kind of give some thoughts on how an implementation of this might look. But essentially what we want to do is we use the file API there's a few different ways to do it, right? Either we use the file API and commit to master in the release environments repository, or we open a merge request in the release environments repository, bumping the versions like, hey, this is the version tags of all the new container images I need to run. And then if it's an MR, it needs to actually then merge that, like set merge when pipeline succeeds, and then pick up the pipeline when it runs on master, and ideally set that as a child pipeline. So it's essentially just trying to do a parent-child pipeline relationship like normal, but it's actually driven through getting a commit onto master that triggers the pipeline. And there's another way to do it actually too. You could commit to master and put skip CI in the commit message, so a pipeline won't run on master, and then manually trigger a pipeline on master immediately after, so you can perform that parent-child pipeline relationship easier. So there's a few different options. But yeah, this is a more common pattern we might see in the future. I know the GitLab com repo, and with all the GitOps stuff that's going over there, and with reliability as well, like they will be interested in that kind of workflow as well.
So they have there's no common decision about how to handle this type of situation, right? So I'm afraid that so if we're gonna commit, we need to commit by API, because committing directly, it doesn't work. It doesn't scale with the amount of things we are changing. But then on the other hand, then you are triggering something downstream after you run that commit, and you have no control about
interleaving
what else changed in the meantime, right? So maybe here we are kinds of in control of what is happening, and then it's kind of easier.
So the good news is with the stuff that runs in the middle, there's less impact in this setup because of the dynamic child pipelines and using like the changes stanza a bit more aggressively. I've been really trying to push down. So like, even if there's no commit, if the commit does not touch files in that environment, then it will not even run jobs for other environments. So I guess there's definitely less overlap, but you're still right. Multiple people could doing really what we're talking about is some kind of preemptive locking on the environment, right? Like you want to be able to say,
no, but sorry, because you mentioned something that
sure.
that is interesting, right? So because you are doing change rules, because if I understood, you're using the CI change rules to figure out. Now, what happens if you have this thing that is changing the stable branch release, right? So think about this. Someone merging a backport on two different stable branches at the same of the same time, or let's say adding the packaging time, they are competing. That's the point. You end up having two competing pipeline with a single resource being the release environment. Okay, so more or less at the same time, they reach the create me a commit updating my own single environment.
Version. Yep, correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then both of them, 1 second apart, are triggering downstream pipeline on master, but only one environment will be updated. The last one landing, because the last commit is the one that will be tested for the differences.
I see what you're saying. Like you need,
because he's not looking at what changed since last run. Is looking at what changed in this commit. And so the last commit only affect 16.3 and not 16.4. And so only that environment will be deployed.
Yeah. I might have to have a closer look at that. It is you're definitely right. Ideally,
so in that specific, you would like to provide some kind of variable, which is say, I am the pipeline responsible for this stable branch or this environment, because know the environment that you are generating. So you say, no matter what is in there, I'm just asking you to deploy this. The pipeline that I'm triggering should only touch this environment and not rely on changes.
And I mean, that's why ideally what we'd do is we'd actually use the API to open a full merge request, set when pipeline succeeds, and actually track the pipeline on main off that merge request. And that also gives you some protection as well, because like if for whatever reason the environment is broken or what have you, the pipeline on the merge request will fail and the merge request will never get merged. But obviously that's a lot more complicated to kind of track and follow.
Yeah, because it breaks the dependency of having a single pipeline. You either have to do active waiting, and then we know that active waiting can't wait forever, and then it's triggering something straight away is kind of more direct way of looking at this. And you can even consider if the downstream pipeline fail, having an on-fail job on the stable branch that just revert the change, because you generated the commit in the same pipeline, so you can store the SHA or something like this and just revert it to the.
It just starts getting so messy.
Maybe we don't want to, right? Because it's broken and we want to, and it has to be fixed. So maybe you can say.
I just
broken.
really wish GitLab, the product, made this pattern easier. Like, it seems to me such a common idea, especially in infrastructure deployment. I want to bump a version somewhere and maintain a child pipeline relationship off that. It's kind of like I want to trigger a pipeline. Or like, it's kind of like you want to introduce a whole concept, which is like this commit or a merge request as a child, with the pipeline on top of that being all treated as one kind of child concept. Anyway, this is why this issue is interesting to look at. So the pipelines in the release environments are completely locking, as in only one entire pipeline across all environments can run at the same time. And I built it that way specifically because I know it's not going to be super high traffic to begin with, and because to reduce this complexity, so there wouldn't be situations where multiple pipelines would run at the same time, kind of thing. I think I've put a global resource group, so literally there can only ever be one pipeline running at the same time.
But the resource group is on job level. So this will.
So the reason it works is because most of what happens in release environments is a giant child pipeline. So like some linting jobs, and then everything else is locked. Like everything deploy related gets locked.
Yeah.
So in terms of your current sort of request or status for this issue, Graham, do you need input on the issue refinement, or is this now it's ready to pick up whenever someone has availability?
It's kind of like, I think it's ready to be picked up, but once again, I think we kind of need to understand how it's not like someone could just pick it up and start coding. I think we need to understand there's a little bit of design that needs to be done here. What do you think, Alessio?
Yeah, when it
like what you were talking about is right. We need to like sit down and be like, A happens, B happens, this is the bit, and then like, okay, we need to implement this now, kind of thing.
I see. Okay. Okay.
Really we want to weigh the benefits of different implementations. Right? So do we value more having a single pipeline that can be open downstream, and have an end-to-end? I think this is important, but
I do like it. I have to admit, it is nice, the UI element. But if we can, I'm not against changing. Yeah.
Is that something that you're able to do, Graham, with some guidance? Like, would you be able to, like, or is this it needs to be a back-end engineer who picks the issue from now and does the scoping?
I can try. I definitely feel, even just talking to Alessio, a bit more confident with someone with back-end engineering experience, just because they know like what the API can and can't do a little bit more than me, and so forth. But I'm kind of happy to work with someone.
Or the alternative is maybe on the issue, maybe make that clear in the description, like, here are the unknowns that we will need to figure out, and then we can see.
Okay.
Capacity is going to start to become more of a problem.
It's fine.
Because from next week, Alessio and Steve are release managers. So we're going to be a little bit dependent on Myra not having maintenance policy extension work to do. There will be some gaps, I'm sure, but I don't think that will be for a little while.
I'm happy to even have a crack at implementing it myself, even if it's just some rusty, Ruby or Bash script to get started.
Let's get the scoping bit done first, really, because I think as much as we can get this to a point where it's like, this is what we want to build, then when Myra does become available, she can just go and do the building, right? Like, we don't have to then get her fully up to speed and do all the scoping.
Sure.
So if there's a piece we can work on sort of now, and particularly if it's something like we can put a proposal together and get that in front of people, then Steve probably does have some time in the next few days. Alessio may do, and then I also hope as we go into release management that if things are reasonably quiet, more likely Steve, I think, may have some time, but also Myra will start to become more available.
Yeah, sure. I think a big part of the feedback will be understanding the technical limitations of the pipeline trigger relationship within GitLab. I think that's really where it's going to come down to. Like, if we can just trigger our own pipelines and manually force the relationship, which I think we can do. I think we do that with deployer in some pieces. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we can make a solution out of that, but it's really understanding that piece, I guess.
Yeah, if you use the trigger pipeline instead of the downstream, I don't know why this is a different name, but as the parent-child pipeline as the one triggered by the CI definition has a name. And then there is another one, which is the pipeline trigger,
right?
Which is, then you get a token. It's the same API, but you have a special token. And this token should link in the same way, because it's what we have with deployer when deployer triggers on Kate's workload. But then you can't set this as dependent. Sorry, someone ring at the doorbell. I don't think you can set this as dependent.
So that's probably the limitation. So this is the thing that someone
it
who's
would be great, Graham, for you as a first pass, maybe to actually kind of define, like, in an ideal world, what do you get, right?
Gotcha.
So for example, things like, does it look like a single flat pipeline? Or some of the other stuff that we've come across around the child pipelines and trigger pipelines is it changes your ability to do retries.
Yes.
So some of those things, it might be good to just think about, like, from a job level, what do we actually need? And then we can try and match that to what we have available.
And the last thing actually that it becomes tricky with as well as permissions, right?
Right, exactly. Yes, exactly. Like, so those are the bits that really, it would be definitely worth thinking about. Who needs to be able to retry these? What level of retry do you need to have?
And that's why it gets me also back to wanting to kind of perhaps use the file API or a merge request, because when you operate based off pipelines triggered off files allow us to use code owners. So we can explicitly say all these environment files can be owned by anyone in the GitLab org group, or these environments specifically can only be changed by delivery, or like it gives us a lot more control. Pipeline, like GitLab gives us more control to control environments via code owners than it does via pipeline ownership. Like pipeline ownership, you can be the permissions for a repo. It's like you can be a maintainer or a developer, and you kind of get like every permission. Like it's too granular. Really, what we want is like, this set of people can always deploy to this. Like this is fine. These environments might need some bit of restriction. And I'd like to be able to build that into the kind of, as I said, the model that it already has. If every environment is a file, then you can just treat everything in Git you can just use all of the standard file ownership stuff that GitLab has, maybe.
Well, you can make this part of the pipeline itself, which is similar to what we are doing with ChatOps on release tools.
Okay.
ChatOps on release tools provides who triggered the ChatOps command, and certain commands are restricted to delivery team members.
Okay, so maybe that's...
So the code itself in the pipeline is checking who's running, so who triggered the thing, who is allowed to, and fail if you're not allowed.
I guess that's having to build that logic ourselves. I guess
you have to build it yourself.
Yeah. So I guess that's what kind of we're circling around a bit, as well as having to build a lot of stuff ourselves, which, you know, maybe that's the end result. That's what we have to do if we have to do.
Exactly.
But you also have to consider this, that in order to trigger the maintainers on GitLab org must be, I think, maintainers as well on the release environment.
Yeah, so that makes...
And I already give them all the power in the world to do
exactly.
And
that's what I was just saying. I was like, I don't like the pipeline level trick, like security via
but
triggers.
They can even change the project settings. That's the problem, right? Because
exactly.
Even if you go in compliance and say you can't change individual merge request settings, this is code owners and everything, fine. You can still go there in the project, say, disable this.
Yeah. I mean, so that's kind of the other thing is like, I assume these release environments may get caught up in compliance somewhere and basically saying that, everyone now needs to be a maintainer of that repo so they can trigger pipelines in it, also seems to be like a very tricky problem to navigate.
Not everyone, every maintainers of GitLab.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Maintainers of GitLab. Fair.
And also, Graham, we probably get a lot of details from the like the audit, I think it's called audit settings, or there's some audit logging that basically gives some records of who is changing what. As long as stuff appears in there, then that's also largely meets a lot of compliance needs. But yes, assume that we absolutely will we will need to be able to
it'll get pulled into a discussion
stuff, basically, and so that we can explain who is changing stuff and why.
Once again, that's why I'd love it to be done through the file interface and stuff, because you got Git history, like it all just works so much nicer when it's all done through Git, but maybe we'll see. Anyway, I'll try and have a stab then at refining that issue and being like, I will talk through what I think would be great to happen, and then Alessio, anyone else who can start picking that apart with all the problems, that's fine. At least then we kind of understand what we're going to end up with. I'm not against changing the whole approach and going back to like the traditional approach we have so far. It's I'd like to avoid that if possible, but we can do that if absolutely necessary. But we'll see.
Yeah, scope it out a bit, Graham. Like I say, I think if you can get a good idea of like what you actually want to see and what we'll need to see, then we can start figuring out what options we have.
And then the final
this is the easy one, right? Like,
the QA issue. Similar to
you just need to test it.
Similar to what we're talking about with distribution, it's kind of this conversation now with quality. I don't have a strong proposal. I'm not very my depth of the ins and outs of the QA suites and everything is not very good. I'll freely admit it's probably something I can learn about, but what I was hoping is for them to say, okay, I see you've got these stable branches and now you're deploying and testing them. Deploying them. If you would like to test them in a way that makes sense, this is what I would do. And that kind of like, and then I'm even if the question of whether they support that or not, we also need to have.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. So where we are right now is we went through Myra worked with Vinci, and Vinci brought in Sanad to basically figure out the interim solution, which puts a load of manual work on quality, right? Now, this is the long-term solution. So quality are definitely on board with the concept already. They won't be against us removing manual work and replacing it with automation. But from reading your comment, Graham, what I don't see on this issue is actually anywhere that explains what we're asking for.
Yeah, sure.
So what we need to do is to go back to quality and explain to them, like, here is what we're doing. Like, this is the setup we are making, like the change we're making. This is how it differs from what we have right now. highlight Myra's interim solution, and then what we need to do is say, here is what we need, right? We are going to end up in a situation where we have, A, B, C. Here is like, we're going to need some testing of this.
Sure.
What would you recommend, right? And then what we can do is actually get it into a proposal where quality can come in and guide us on what is the level of risk that they're happy with. And also we will probably have requirements as well, right? In this case, because what the worst case, I think, for us is like there is zero testing at this stage. And then when we try and tag a release, we run into 100 test failures, right? So trying to avoid for that stuff will probably be quite
key. Look, I agree. I think everyone's on the same page. I thought I called it out clearly in the issue description what I was after, but I'm not sure if just me not explaining, or maybe I'm missing the context around
they won't
it.
have it, right? So I think for quality, assume that they don't know anything about the existing release environment. They don't understand how we tag patches. So what they're not easily able to drop in on is like, how is this different? What are we changing that will affect things?
Okay. Yep. Okay. So I can call that out then. Sure. Yep. Okay. And I'll give an example environment. I might actually give a real example environment and say like, look here, here's the environment over here. This is what we're testing, kind of thing. Maybe that might make it easier.
And highlight what the requirements are in terms of like what we need. So I think just from your description at the moment, it says like, for example, like we need a test suite to test this. We don't really. What we need is
perhaps that's the wrong language
to have been detected, right?
Right.
Does that make sense? Sure. Like what we actually need is developers to receive feedback that the thing they're committing against this stable branch is not going to go well with our patch.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm looking for is the equivalent to when we actually tag, because like there's no point us doing test suite A, then we tag and it's test suite or test setup B, and then they're like there's differences, because then there's no point in doing the whole thing of testing early. It's got to be equivalent to. So maybe that's the distinction I'll make, is the equivalent of what happens now once we tag needs to, and I think once we tag, we deploy to release.gitlab.net. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, we want to shift left those QA. We want to do this before the tag.
So I think then that's what
we run smoke, reliable, and admin tests.
Sure. Yeah.
I think, but they know better than us. So if we can pinpoint what we are doing, that's the right approach. Say,
I agree.
This before.
Yeah. Okay, I'll make it clearer now, and I think that gives me enough key information to call out that. Oh yeah, right now we do it, we tag, we deploy to release.gitlab.net. Instead now it's going to be like something else, 15.5 like 16.5 stable, whatever it is. Like it's a different environment and it's happening earlier, but we want it to be the equivalent of what happens after, just slightly earlier. Cool.
Yeah, and do bring in the issue, like all contents of the issue that Myra had for the interim, because
to link the two. Yeah.
When Vinci asks me about this, I have to say right now I don't think I can explain to her the switchover or whether we're doing both, and why, if we're doing both, we are okay to only have one of them right now. You might need some input from Myra there, but this is the point. These two things need to join up, right? Where we then go, we have an interim solution that we're happy with right now. Now we're moving to a long-term solution. Like, how does that actually happen?
Sure. Because I guess I was trying to me, I just see this as still like not almost like a I'm just kind of get things going like in a kind of iterative kind of fashion. I was not trying to kind of I didn't want to be like starting to talk about when we deprecate one or the other, like, when we're like, oh, this is when we're switching over. To keep things simple, I was just like trying to not worry about the larger context of the interim solution and switching over and things like that, because I don't know.
Maybe that's right. So in which case, Graham, if it's an earlier iteration, then perhaps your requirements are different. And is this I want confidence in the environment? Like, I think that's actually what's not very clear about what are we asking quality to give us right now?
Yeah. Okay.
In terms of like what testing do we want to have, right? Like, how much confidence do we need to have in these commits in this environment? And then what we did for the maintenance policy extension, EPIC, was worked with quality, and it was basically a balancing act of like balance how much automation versus manual work we're giving to quality.
Yeah,
and they came out with a solution that they're comfortable with.
Yeah,
so
cool,
it'll be something similar. We don't necessarily have to come out with the test suites.
That makes sense. I think I'll anchor it. I think the way to go is to really anchor it to the current process around the tagging and release.gitlab.net. I think once I can make that distinction clearer, this is more or less the same thing just earlier, then I'm actually hoping they should be able to come up, like they should be able to give me enough information to go on quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Cool.
Because I think I've confused things. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I've also confused things talking about like older releases and everything, like, because it is important. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that detail was too confusing as well, but hopefully.
Yeah, I think just from scanning through, it's very specific. And I think that makes people think that we have a plan and then don't have all the context. And actually, I think what we're actually saying is we have some ideas, but we want them to have a plan.
We have the plan.
In which case, I think we flip this around a little bit.
Sure.
And the other thing that we do need to have a think about, and it might be worth asking quality when they come up with a proposal for us, which I can, once we've got this written up, I can work with Vinci to get someone to help us with that, is the actual length of time this is going to take to run. And that's something which we need to probably have a quality to help us with.
Time.
So from a developer perspective, if I am preparing a bug fix, I've got to put it in 3 stable branches. Like, what is actually an acceptable amount of time that takes me? That's not really our problem. That is more like when quality tell us how we can achieve what we need, we can work from there. But I will expect that we're pushing a project onto quality to reduce some of these test suites.
Possibly, yeah.
We've already done it on the maintenance policy extension because we are using the package and test suite, which has very high flakiness, which is going to become much more of a problem than it currently is. So I think I know that that was already something quality were planning to address, but I think it's increasing the urgency of that.
Because the packaging QA is not running smoke and reliable tests.
I don't think so. No, I think it's separate. Yeah.
And I think that's part of why or at least I kind of was pushing release environments in the first place, was something more full, like the environment itself is fuller, so we can run more tests, right? Because it's hard when you're just running a single Docker container. You can't do GitLab pages, you can't do CAS, you can't do so much stuff because it's one Docker container running inside CI already. Whereas this is like, it's proper environment, it's got enough things that you should be able to throw a full, pretty good test suite at it, and then
and that might be the right way to go, but then what we'll need to do is think about the actual process, right? Because then it's sort of how much sort of time do we need to give developers if they merge something in to a stable branch before we actually tag? We sort of need to just hang these 2 bits together. So there'll definitely be future iterations, I'm quite sure.
No, I think you're right. And I think end to end this whole process, we're going to have to do a bit of like review on, right? Like, just because if building images takes forever and then QA takes forever, it can be I think people just going to kind of have to learn to deal with it, but it might push efforts like, can we make QA suites faster? Can we make image building faster somehow it does become a developer experience kind of problem kind of thing.
It does. Sure. Exactly. That's right. Exactly. I'm sure we'll pass some of these things around. One thing as well that we might see it's going to be tricky to link, but we may need to try and do, is I wonder if some of these projects, so this project plus the maintenance policy extension, some of the changes we are affecting on test suites might end up being solved by quality removing where some of the tests run. Right. And what I think that could look like, and what I think at the moment it looks a little bit like, is to reduce time on the merge pipelines. Some of the tests that previously were running on those pipelines are being removed or becoming more optional, which means we'll probably see some more of those failures in the deployment pipeline. So we might end up being like
shuffling
the stable branches, but
just,
we make auto deployed less stable.
Yeah, right.
That's definitely possible.
Fun. Okay.
Health checks. This is the other thing, actually, that would be very interesting as a future iteration on release environments, especially if we find these tests are slow. Is I wonder if this is almost a nice ground for starting to look at other things that we could have detected with health checks, that we catch stuff before the tests run, because that would be such a good direction.
I 100% agree, and I think yes, at some iteration, I'd like to get a system kind of involved with what they're thinking about that kind of side. Like, how do you just know this environment is safe pre and post deployment before QA? Because I think they've done a little bit of work on that or thinking about that already for GitLab.com, and it should all pretty much be a cut and paste, right? Because they're both GitLab environments. So if they're like, oh yeah, we've developed this matrix of taking SLR.
I don't think they're as far in as we'd like them to be. I think they think more up and other stuff. So yeah, it might. I think it's a lot harder on some of those environments. So these ones might be small enough and isolated enough that we can get more of a handle.
On. Yeah, that's fine.
But yeah, that could be another way we could handle some of this test delay.
Yes, that's true as well. If we can give immediate feedback, at least if they think that things are mostly okay without full QA, that would also help a lot.
Yeah.
And I think once again, like the way we trigger QA, we do actually have options, right? Like the strategy doesn't have to be, actually, no, I'll take that back. I was going to say, we don't have to fail the stable branch pipeline if QA fails. We can do, like not a dependent failure, but I guess we probably do. We want developers to know if QA has failed and fail their pipeline. I think that is important. So
I think we have to get to that point where that feedback can go rapidly to the developers. The big risk of all these changes is that we are going to increase release manager workload. Because not much from this work, but from the maintenance policy extension. If we are, it's going to make patch releases get more similar to security release workloads in terms of us handling 3 stable branches. So that's the big risk. Cool. Great. Nice. Is there any other stuff that we should go through?
Nothing from me.
Super. Okay, great stuff. Well, I will skip on 8. I have it on my to-do list to actually also comment on the retro, and then we can pull some new issues. But thank you very much for the discussion. This was super interesting and hopefully useful.
Yeah, no, it was useful. I'll go back and kind of make some changes that we need to make and try and keep things moving.
Super. Okay, awesome. Great. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. I'll speak to you soon.